Our NFL Week 10 recap, and some may say therapy session as we work our way through the action, if we can call it that, off NFL Week 10. We'll talk through some of the games that had us most excited, some of the biggest talking points. We'll work through some of those on this edition of RotoViz OT. Shawn, this was a strange week, low-scoring week. We had a lot of kicker issues. We had a lot of special teams issues, some dreadful quarterback play. Quarterbacks couldn't get enough of turning the ball over in some of these contests. So there was a lot of things that happened. And, I mentioned the kicker issues in the San Francisco game that we may get to in this edition. Moody comes back from his injury, misses 3 field goals, scores one at the end as time expires. I don't know if you've seen the clip, Shawn, of Deebo Samuel over in the long snapper's face and over, getting into it with Mooney during the games.
I don't like Deebo anymore. I have no sympathy.
That wasn't great. That wasn't great.
I mean, you got to support your teammates. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, you're in it together at that particular point. Young Wei Koo missed a couple of field goals in there as well.
A couple. He missed like 15.
Trying to be nice, Shawn, trying to play it here for the team kicker. But lots of issues like that. So snafus in different games. Some of that led to scoring, some of it didn't. So we're going to kick it off here, Shawn, by talking about the Cardinals and the Jets. That was a game that we seen scoring, and I guess we can say it was a game we've seen some issues in. The Jets continue on their struggle in this one. Aaron Rodgers didn't look great. He hasn't looked great over the course of the season. They obviously did get the win against the Texans previously in their last outing, but they're now 3-7 this season. The Cardinals, somewhere I didn't see them really going, is 6-4 at this particular point. They won 31-6, and they completely blew the doors off the New York Jets. Starting this one off, Shawn, and I told Shawn this before we started recording today. I had in our guillotine league where I probably deserve to get chopped just based on this decision alone, but looks like I am going to
kind of feel that way.
Yeah, it looks like I'm going to get chopped. I made the decision based on facing the Jets and how Kyler has sometimes struggled, particularly as I've mentioned after those kind of first 15 or so scripted plays. Sometimes when it gets into an kind of improv style play, that it's not working out for him. And then we had the tilting moment last week with the Trey McBride miss in the back of the end zone. So I picked up Sam Darnold, Shawn, and put him in the lineup for Kyler Murray. And I think I'm going to get chopped by half a point. So I really deserve it for what I did there. But this game starts off with a catch and run that is originally a touchdown. Another thing we seen yesterday was a lot of plays where it's really a touchdown, then overturned on replay down at the 1. So we did have that for James Conner. His butt was basically down. It was overturned. He walks in then on the second down for a touchdown. We get some really impressive play from Kyler Murray in that opening point. At one point of this game, Shawn, and I don't know if this continued beyond this, but he did set a franchise record to start the game with 17 straight completions. I don't know if he finished with more than that, but I didn't note that at the particular time. He has a nice touchdown throw to Harrison on a kind of a deep lofted ball, and then some nice plays in there to Trey McBride as well. He has his own rushing touchdown also. Again, we can talk about some of the ball placement and things like that, but when you have a game where you go 22 off 24, 266 yards, 1 touchdown, just took the 1 sack in this game, rushes for 21 total yards on 3 attempts for 2 rushing touchdowns. A huge performance here from Kyler Murray. And, I have been very critical of his play, but in this particular contest, he looked great. They had just no answer in that first 3 quarters for the Cardinals, which was very impressive. They also had no answer for kind of the rushing offense for the Cardinals in that early stage as well. They end up rushing 32 times for 147 yards and 3 rushing touchdowns. James Conner also has the 5 targets, 5 receptions for 80 yards. Trey McBride had 5 targets. Harrison had 5 targets. They turned that into 4 for 71 for McBride, and he has a crazy hurdle play again this week where he kind of carries the defender like a school bag before he breaks away and then hurdles. But on the Cardinal side, because that's where I think it's most important to look here, is the improvement that they have shown. And also, it's great to see Conner being used in the receiving game, as I mentioned there. But he also is getting a little bit more worked in with Trey Benson, who had 10 carries in this for 62 yards. But part of that also being that this game got out of hand as the game progressed. Rodgers 22 of 35, 151, no touchdowns, no interceptions. Breece Hall is the 52 rush attempts. Garrett Wilson is 5 for 41, leading the way for the team. Devontae Adams at 13 targets, Shawn, in this game for 6 receptions for 31. Lots going wrong here for the Jets, and it couldn't really be getting much worse at this particular time of the season. But let's look at the positives, and that would be Kyler Murray, James Conner, and how the Cardinals dominated here.
Yeah, and if you've read Blair's wrong read preview of this game, you know that the Jets came in with a lot of very superficially strong defensive metrics. This is another game that demonstrates how fraudulent that really is. This is a team that has played the Titans. They played the Patriots twice. They had Bo Nix relatively early. They played Sam Darnold. They were torn to shreds by Russell Wilson's punt passes. Last week, they defeated the Texans, who could not win yesterday, despite picking Jared Goff off 5 times. This is a super weak schedule that they have fallen on their faces against. And I mean, this game was absolute annihilation. We gave Kyler Murray a really hard time last week for, frankly, what was one of the worst plays you'll ever see a quarterback make. And yet, this game was sensational. And I mean, there's really not a whole lot more to say about it, other than this is a perfect quarterback game. I mean, you watch what Lamar Jackson is doing this year for the Ravens, and I think one of the hard things for the Cardinals, certainly Cardinals fans, is that these two players are just so different. That Kyler Murray, despite the mobility, doesn't do a lot with it. That despite having decent arm strength and good accuracy, it's pretty meaningless because he can't see over the line of scrimmage. They have all of these weapons, and yet they don't have an explosive offense. If you didn't know everything that had happened coming into this game, if you didn't know what Kyler Murray had even been the previous couple of years in and amongst all of those injuries, you would watch this game and think that Kyler Murray was one of the best quarterbacks in history, the probable MVP of this season, and someone who's going to be the catalyst for the Cardinals to make a Super Bowl run this year, to be the NFC West favorites for the next decade, and to be in the mix to win multiple Super Bowls over that stretch. And so, if you have some Trey McBride, what's that?
We also do know what happened before the game.
Right, but the traits that Kyler Murray brings that people have been so enthusiastic about over the years. I mean, again, I don't believe the Jets are an elite defensive team, but they're certainly not a terrible defensive team. And even though it's somewhat low-key in this, just the 5 targets for Marvin Harrison, he scores. It's a good fantasy game, but it's certainly not one where people are going to be like, oh, everybody should have drafted Marvin Harrison number 1. He's going to be a superstar, et cetera, et cetera. And maybe that's a little bit of the problem still here, where, Trey McBride also with the 5 targets. You mentioned the play from Trey McBride. It was unfortunate because Kyler Murray goes 22 for 24. Of the 2 incompletions, one was a pass to Trey McBride in the end zone, where it was almost like they had watched that play from last week. As I know that was a focal point for many people. And they're like, you know what we should do? We should try and get Trey McBride a touchdown. So they had him singled up. Kyler Murray throws a pretty good pass. I mean, it needs to be a little bit lower, just like barely, but it was a good pass. It hits Trey McBride in the hands. He's at full stretch. You watch the rest of his catches and how strong his hands are, and you're thinking, like, if he can't make the play, then, you're just not going to make all the plays. To a certain extent, maybe that's giving a free pass to someone because he's a good player. And yet, again, I mean, how he played, his other 4 receptions in this game for 71 yards, he was making the Jets defenders look like little kids.
That one's on the quarterback. It's not far off, but when you're dealing with that's a snap from inside the 10-yard line, and you're putting it out to a one-on-one wide receiver or a tight end in this case. It's just a little bit high. It's probably half a hand high, and that's the difference in trying to catch with your fingertips and trying to get your thumb on the ball as well to get an easier catch. So I'm not going to rail on him this week for that particular throw, but I think that is also you cannot not ask Trey McBride to grow an inch to catch the ball on that play. Like, he's a fully developed human at this point.
Well, you can ask Trey McBride to do anything. He's the greatest.
Yeah, he can do it.
I mean, just unreal play from him. James Conner wrote about it last week in the Zero RB Universe. Continues to have easily the best evasion metrics in the NFL. He is actually limited to under 3 yards per carry in this game, but shows off the plus receiving ability, going 5 for 80. I mean, this is a big back who's not particularly fast, and yet through vision and that like tiny understated athleticism and then sheer force of will is an utterly dominant running back and has been for a long time. So it's cool to see all of those things happening. Trey Benson looked explosive in this game. Amari DiMercado got a few touches, looks explosive. I mean, it'd be nice if Michael Wilson were a little better. He had sort of a humorous play in this game where the ball is right on him and he like leaps and almost knocks it away with his legs because he manages to jump so high. Greg Dortch has not a particularly good game in this one. You know, one more weapon and you're unstoppable. Obviously, the Cardinals are loaded. You look at the other side of the ball, the New York Jets are also loaded, but they have Aaron Rodgers. And they also have a coaching staff that would have never been good, but like 10 years ago would have maybe been borderline viable. It's hard to watch the end here for Davante Adams, in part because it's the end, I guess. He gets 13 targets. He's never open in this game, so there's no excuse for getting 13 targets. You need to get a little bit more Breece Hall. He looked good. They did not lean into him. It's hard to lean into the running back when you're getting blown out.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, this team is in complete and total disarray. 4.3 yards per attempt for Aaron Rodgers when you have Garrett Wilson, when you have Davante Adams, and when you're playing against an Arizona defense that is simply bad. Now, this may be a situation where they're on the rise. It may be a situation a month from now where, you know, we say the same things that are true about the Washington Commanders, which is that they have turned things around and their pass defense is well above average. Now, I mean, they were scorched a bit by the punt passes and the fact that George Pickens can make some pretty extraordinary receptions. But right now, especially when you know that the 49ers had to scratch and claw and get pretty lucky to win at the end against a Tampa Bay team that doesn't have really any players left, and the Cardinals look like the best team in the NFC West, it'll be interesting to see how the second half of the season goes. That division is probably going to be the most exciting in football. You have 4 teams, all of them with some weaknesses, but all of them with interesting coaching staffs, elite upside. You got quarterback battles that are going to be fascinating to watch. Yeah, Seahawks, Cardinals, Rams, 49ers. That's the division that I think is going to have the most drama the rest of the way.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting. The Cardinals had, if not the toughest, one of the toughest schedules to kick off the season. And now they have got to the flip side of that where they have one of the easier schedules the rest of the way. So you mentioned the division. They get the Seahawks in week 11, then the Vikings, then back to the Seahawks. So the Seahawks twice in the next 3 games, and that's really going to set up how that picture goes, because I think both of those teams are interesting. I would slightly favor the Seahawks between the two of them for the rest of the season, but then they get the Patriots, Panthers, Rams, 49ers. So it's going to be an interesting run here for them towards, you know, if they're going to be something to contend with in the playoffs. I just still think overall we see these flashes from time to time from Kyler. It doesn't tend to be consistent, but this was certainly a very, very good performance.
I just think in so many of the games where they win and he puts up superficially good stats, or I mean, superficially probably not the right way to say it. He puts up fantasy stats, but from a reality perspective, he's still really limiting the team. I thought in this performance, he unlocked everything. The confidence level looked different. The play calling looked different. I mean, maybe it's just a collapsing New York Jets team, because one of the things that you get every week is you get a team against an opponent that's either bad or like the Jets collapsing, and they eviscerate them, and then they come back out and do what Jared Goff did yesterday. So yeah, we're gonna get some week to week strangeness in performance. Maybe it's just one of those all time great games, but especially with how much I've criticized him, I felt like I had to say how astonishing his performance really was yesterday, just how good he looked.
Moving on to the Kansas City Chiefs, Shawn, who are somehow at the end of this one 9-0 on the season. The Denver Broncos pushed them all the way in this particular contest. It finishes 16-14 to the Chiefs in another game of the day that was relatively low scoring, but this did have some interesting fantasy takeaways as well. It leads to a situation where it's a blocked field goal as time expires for the Chiefs to maintain that record. So, different outcome, and we'll be talking about the not the overtime, but the late game drive from Bo Nix to get them into field goal territory to win the game against the Broncos in Arrowhead. But it obviously flips now. It's the Chiefs are 9-0 on the season. The Broncos are now 5-5. I thought, and we've mentioned this, Shawn, we're I guess a little bit biased in terms of our thoughts on Bo Nix throughout the offseason, the draft process, and now as a Denver Bronco. But I think it's clear to see that there's been significant improvement week on week in his performances over the course of the season. That leads to a 14-10 halftime score in this, and the Broncos then don't score, though, in that second half. So I talk about the fourth quarter Bo Nix. We got some glimpses here, but we didn't get points to go along with it. But he does have 2 passing touchdowns in this. Does take 2 sacks for 33 yards, but 215 passing yards, 22 of 30. Has nothing really in the rushing game here, but against a Chiefs defense who we've also talked about being a very tough out and on the road in Arrowhead, I thought it was an incredibly impressive performance. We do get a touchdown to Vele. We get a touchdown to Sutton. Sutton has 9 targets, 6 for 70, and a touchdown for him. Outside of those 2 guys, there's not a huge amount happening. We get 4 targets to Mims for 4 receptions for 13 yards. And Shawn, Troy Franklin gets 2 targets. We have to update everyone on him every week. 1 reception for 9 yards going his way. Estime comes in. He leads the backfield with a huge amount, well, not a huge amount, but a huge portion of their work. Out of the 23 total carries in the game, he has 14 of those for 53 yards. He's been worked in quite a bit more. And then in terms of like Javonte Williams had 1 carry in this, Jaleel McLaughlin had 2 carries, Marvin Mims had 3 carries. So not a lot for those other guys. As maybe a team that I think still has, a chance to get into the playoffs, looking to those younger players. The running game from the Chiefs, again, we've talked about the issues with that in the past. It's pretty much non-existent here. 19 attempts for 57 yards. We have struggles throughout the game from Mahomes. My question was, in terms of him and Worthy and how that has gone. We get the deep shot to Worthy in this, Shawn, which would have been a deep touchdown, but it's out of bounds. Even if Worthy stays in bounds, he's not going to get that ball. The question for me there is, can Mahomes still throw that pass? I think that the answer is probably yes, but we've seen consistency being an issue this season. Kelce, though, since we have lost Rashee Rice, has been a major part of the offense. He leads the way with 12 targets, 8 receptions, 64 yards, and a touchdown. That touchdown coming on a 4th down in the first half, where I thought there was a difference in some of the teams. And, we've seen that even at the end with the Broncos, where they're settling for that field goal to finish the game off rather than to try and keep pushing it towards the end zone. They get that field goal blocked. We've seen some teams be aggressive, some teams not be aggressive in terms of trying to get into the end zone in certain situations this week. But Kelce been heavily involved. Kareem Hunt had 10 targets, 7 receptions for 65 yards. And then we had 5 targets for Hopkins, 4 targets for Worthy. Hopkins did get 56 yards. Worthy just had 1 reception for 11 yards. So over the last 2 weeks, he has been a crushing blow to some of his managers. Shawn, what were some of your takeaways here? Was there much for you on the KC side? Obviously, you get the big game again here from Travis Kelce, who's a major focal point. But what was your overall thoughts on this one?
This game was a tough watch because Patrick Mahomes continues to get worse. And we mentioned a couple of weeks ago that he was playing so poorly that I said I thought it was a situation where he could no longer be considered the GOAT. You think about how consistently dynamic and dominant and amazing Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, Drew Brees were for, a couple of decades. And, right now, Mahomes is so bad as a thrower of the football that it is shocking. Now, is he still well above average quarterback? Very clearly, right? And you look at the Sports Info Solutions numbers. One of the interesting things about those adjusted numbers that use a charting component to divide out the EPA responsibilities for different guys is that Mahomes and then even much more dramatically Bo Nix look a lot better than their raw stats. And so if you don't like Bo Nix, then certainly I wouldn't expect you to buy that. But his advanced stats, according to SIS, are really, really good coming into this game. Also good for Mahomes. And you can continue to see all of the things that, for example, Will Levis can't do and Sam Darnold can't do, where you have these guys who are not true NFL quarterbacks. There's no pocket presence. There's no ability to make decisions. There's a franticness to their play that undermines any real possibility of them eventually being viable starters. If not for the J.J. McCarthy injury, he would have been in long ago. Sam Darnold is having an excruciatingly bad season. Patrick Mahomes can do all of those things and has always done them. His ability to manage the speed of the game and manage the moment is unparalleled. In the past, he's also been like the greatest arm talent that the NFL has seen. That doesn't mean pure arm strength, but the ability to make all different types of throws, to throw accurately, to throw deep, to throw behind your back, all of those types of things. That magic is completely gone. We've been frustrated with his deep passes. Obviously, he's missed Worthy earlier in the season. You have Worthy with the terrible play last week that got so much attention, deservedly so. But in that game, he also misses Justin Watson deep. And you're starting to think to yourself, the trolling that Tyreek Hill did when he moved from the Chiefs to the Dolphins that seemed so flagrantly absurd about Mahomes' inability to throw the deep pass now seems prophetic, right? Or at least accurate. The pass to Worthy in the game yesterday was one of the worst passes you will ever see. This was a situation, there was a pass with Brady Quinn, 10, 15, 20 years ago now, whatever it was that Brady Quinn played, where he had a guy deep down the sideline on a situation that was essentially a Hail Mary. And so the only thing that you're really trying to do is throw it up there, end of the half, let your guys go make a play. He threw that ball like 7 yards out of bounds and short. How do you throw a borderline Hail? Now, again, it was in between a Hail Mary and a vertical sideline route, but it was end of the half. It's going to be the last play. Like, there's no downside to an interception. The only thing that you really don't want to do is have the ball come down like a skid 7 yards out of bounds. Well, also, yeah, if you get the return. Yesterday, that was the most wide open that Worthy has been all season. He's got his guy beaten by a mile. It's not going to be competitive. Any throw that is inbounds up the field is going to be an easy touchdown. The ball's barely out of bounds, Colm. It's like 5 yards out of bounds. Worthy, in part because of like how bad the play was last week and how much attention it got, you can see him trying to like drag his feet as he's tracking the ball further and further out of bounds. And finally, he's just like, okay, I dragged my feet and I reached out. The ball is still another 3 yards out there. It's like, there's nothing you can do about that. And I think that for people who don't care about Xavier Worthy or think Xavier Worthy is bad, they're going to be just like, that's another misplay to Xavier Worthy. Haha, the Chiefs drafted a vertical threat who is bad with a first-round pick. Which, again, would be fine because the Chiefs could overcome all of that. You get to the end of this drive, and Patrick Mahomes. So, again, you have to be you have to be fair in terms of looking at these different players and like picking and choosing. And we gave Kyler Murray so much of a hard time last week because he couldn't see Trey McBride. Yeah, This play with Patrick Mahomes was that Trey McBride play, except he saw him the whole time, and then he threw it almost in the stands. Like almost in the stands.
and that was the play that they settled then for their own field goal to take the lead. And then that was where obviously the Broncos almost won it at the end because they could settle for a field goal themselves. So yeah, another really bad, but there's some, poor quarterback play all week, but Mahomes has been obviously they're 9-0, and it sounds ridiculous to say there's concerns there, but it just he's game managing the games very well, and they're winning the games. But there's just lots of times where you're like, 4 years ago that's not the way that it was happening. Shawn, Broncos side, Estime, Bo Nix, any thoughts?
Yeah, so it's kind of thing where if the season just started this week, or if your introduction to football just started yesterday, you could easily be forgiven for thinking that Bo Nix was the all-time great and Patrick Mahomes was the guy that people are worried can't throw the deep ball, has these other limitations as a passer. Maybe he can game manage a team to victory, but he's a low ceiling guy, and that's all he's going to be. In this game here against what is a truly elite Chiefs defense, Bo Nix tore them to shreds in the first half. And yeah, you've got to be able to keep that going in the second half. You're going to have some possessions that don't result in points playing against this Kansas City Chiefs team. This is a game where the Broncos were above 50% on third down. They averaged more yards per play on the ground. They averaged more yards per play through the air. They didn't have enough plays. And part of that is that if you want to go back and take the most favorable reading of what the Chiefs are doing, you can say the Chiefs control the ball. They limit the number of possessions. They play good defense. They're able to convert. You add their 2 successful fourth down conversions. And one of the things that Andy Reid has started to do a little bit more effectively is manage games. They go for it and fourth down twice. They get both of them, including a touchdown to Travis Kelce. So you create this situation where the Chiefs have more time of possession. They have 10 more plays. And then it comes down to how do you execute in the big moments? Well, there was a big moment before the half when you're trying to drive for a field goal, because this is going to be a game that comes down to something like 16-14 and the field goals matter. Bo Nix drives them to the edge of field goal range, throws a perfect pass to Courtland Sutton. Courtland Sutton drops it. That would have given them an easy field goal, or at least a very makeable field goal. You go up 17-10 there. You give yourself a little bit more margin. Also, at the end of the game, he drives them into an easy field goal range. I mean, I've seen some different numbers floated about, but it's about a 95% chance you're going to make that field goal. One of the things, again, for the Chiefs are a great team. Saying that Patrick Mahomes is playing poorly is not the same thing as saying the Chiefs are a fraud. That part, I think, is not true, right? I mean, the Chiefs are very, very good. And one of the things that they do is that they play like a 2-time defending champion that wants to go undefeated, that wants to win a third in a row. And you see that across the board on all the plays. You just don't see field goals where one side blows up the line so completely that everybody is through, right? If you did, then teams wouldn't kick extra points. They would go for 2 because you're at risk of getting the extra points blocked all the time. I mean, the Chiefs destroyed the Broncos on that play. They blocked the field goal. And so you win the game. I mean, did they deserve to win? Definitely not. But this is kind of the process that you're in now, where the Chiefs are one of the all-time great teams, not from a 2024 perspective, but from a cumulative perspective. The Broncos are a building team. If you're a Broncos fan, this is one of the most devastating losses you could possibly suffer, because a win here and the Broncos are in fantastic shape to make the playoffs. With the loss, and they have to really get going now. But globally, I mean, you've got to be over the moon, because unlike the situation with the team that got to pick number 1 overall, you have a franchise quarterback. You have one of these coaches who could potentially be in the mix with an Andy Reid and a Bill Belichick in terms of probably not, matching those guys, but being in that next group, which is a very, very, very small class. When you have this combination of coach and QB, what you can accomplish, especially over the course of a decade or 15 years, it's extremely exciting. And you mentioned schedule. One of the things for the Cardinals is that their schedule still includes a lot of interesting teams, and that it includes a lot of those NFC West teams. The Broncos face the Falcons, who are not good, the Raiders, who are a train wreck, the Browns, who have Jameis Winston at quarterback, the Colts, who, we don't even need to dive into that, the Chargers, who are basically the Broncos with less talent, the Bengals, who could put up like 50 points and lose, and then Kansas City again. This is a great schedule now to go on a run. You had the previous couple of weeks, the Ravens, the Chiefs. That was going to be the hard part. If you can steal a win in one of those two games, then you're 6-4 and you're off to the races. They're still in good shape. Right now you go on a run. So even more than what you do when you're the underdog, it's what you do when you face this 4 straight game stretch of Falcons, Raiders, Browns, Colts, where you should go undefeated. How do you handle those games?
Let's talk now about the San Francisco 49ers and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This is the game where the man who was, under extreme duress during the game from his own teammates gets to be the hero at the end, and Moody kicks the field goal to win it. Shawn, this game gets tied up at the end, and we have to highlight this because we joke at times about, Baker Mayfield being like some sort of a Brett Favre character in these games. He has Nick Bosa basically, and we're praising Trey McBride for his physical feats of strength. He runs basically like just holding them off for 5-6 yards and throws a late 4th and 7 completion to Rachaad White. And then there's a bunch of 49ers flags in the next couple of plays, and then they tie it up. But unfortunately, as the game looks to be going to overtime, well, obviously, fortunately for 49ers fans, they get back up the field and they get the W. Couple of notes in this one, Shawn. We get a long touchdown early for Ricky Pearsall. He goes 4 for 73 and a touchdown on 6 targets. We get 11 targets for Juwan Jennings. He seemed to be in and out with, a little bit banged up throughout the game, but 7 receptions for 93 for him. Christian McCaffrey was back, was the big story. 7 targets, 6 receptions for 68. Deebo Samuel has 6 targets, 5 receptions for 62. And George Kittle just has the 4 targets, 3 receptions for 57. But Shawn, his touchdown in this game, absolute insanity in terms of the way Brock Purdy was able to extend the play, and then the reception, get the feet down of ball control. Tremendous play. I thought it one of the best touchdowns of the week from George Kittle, but it kind of is something that you just expect from him. Shawn, Brock Purdy is playing some great football, but he's 25 of 36, so the completion percentage isn't that high, but 353 yards, 2 passing touchdowns, no interceptions. I think looking at the 49ers, they feel like a team that if things start to go their way, they could be very dangerous moving forward here. They're now 5-4. I asked the question a couple of weeks ago if their Super Bowl window had closed. Maybe it's just peaking open for this season again for them now that they have McCaffrey back. But again, like you touched on earlier with the Buccaneers, a team that, didn't have Mike Evans here, no longer has Chris Godwin for the rest of the season. Cade Otton at 8 targets leads the way, 5 for 35. We get 7 targets for Rachaad White, 6 for 39, and a touchdown for him. Bucky Irving has 3 targets, but it's 116 total passing yards for Baker Mayfield in this. I'm giving him credit for that last bit of play, but throughout the game, they didn't do a lot in the passing game. They have 27 carries in total for 110 yards and 1 touchdown. That going to Bucky Irving. He had a nice 14-yard run. He has 13 for 73. I know we bang on about Rachaad White. He has 10 for 31. So they're still splitting the backfield out between those two guys. We get McMillan is active in this game, but isn't involved at all. We also, Sean Tucker a couple of weeks ago, the massive game against the Saints, and we're not looking to have more people in that backfield, but he didn't have a touch this week, so he has not really done a huge amount since that point. But the 49ers, Shawn, and Bucky Irving, I think, are the 2 interesting places here. Any takeaways from the 49ers versus the Buccaneers?
As I'm looking at this line with Deebo Samuel, 3 carries, 14 yards, the 6 receptions, 68 yards, it reminded me that I did want to note one of the things that was interesting about the Broncos game, which is that they have moved Marvin Mims in terms of what his role is. And now they want him to be a Deebo type of character. At least that's how they used him against the Chiefs. Got the ball in his hands. That appeared to be an interesting approach and possibly more effective. Well, I mean, anything would be more effective than how he's been used to this point. Brock Purdy, I think, is a great contrast with a Sam Darnold because those guys are looked at somewhat similarly, at least in some quarters, and they're just completely different players. Right? Brock Purdy is a legitimate, again, MVP might be a stretch because you know that it's predicated on other guys, a little bit like we got the Jared Goff unmasking yesterday. And like, yeah, what you want him to do is play well, and when things go against him, have the toughness to bounce back and facilitate for the team. And both of those guys do that at an elite level. They can make these plays. The game is not too fast for them. Again, things that are not true of Sam Darnold. But I do think it's very relevant here that one of the things that Ben and I talked a lot about on Stealing Bananas is that, yes, you could give Brock Purdy credit for a lot of what he was doing, but it was just extremely important to also accept the fact that Christian McCaffrey is this unique all-time great type of player, that Kyle Shanahan is a schemer and play caller at a level that very few people are at, and then you have Purdy surrounded by all of these other weapons. One of the things that has been clear in 2024 is that while they do miss sort of a peak version of Brandon Ayuk, to me, he is not a playmaker or is not a difference maker in the way that a lot of alpha receivers are. I don't think that they should have paid him. The opportunity for a trade would have been pretty interesting. And one of the things that we see here is that Juwan Jennings, when he gets a chance, is able to mostly replicate that. Now, you mentioned he was in and out. He came in a little bit limited. He took some vicious hits in this game on his 11 targets. Doesn't have as much run after the catch ability as an Ayuk, but that big target, he can get open. He can make some of those plays work down the field. And then off of that, these other players can thrive. It was disappointing in this one that we got so much pass blocking for George Kittle. If you have Kittle in all of your lineups and you're trying to figure out where he is on every play, you locate him. And then in the game yesterday, so often Brock Purdy would drop back and you're like, George Kittle is pass blocking again. Now, that is one of the things that you do have to be aware of and just accept in terms of what they do. But when they got him going, he has the 33-yard catch and run that set up a big part of this comeback. And then he has the touchdown. Those two plays, you could argue, outside of the Pearsall touchdown, are probably the most important plays in this particular game for them on offense. You really want to figure out some opportunities to get more of that and not less. On the other side, Baker Mayfield, and again, this is one of the reasons why we want to think of the NFL as a dynamic type of environment, and players do not necessarily stay what they were. So I don't believe that Sam Darnold can play as a starter. I certainly don't believe Will Levis can play as a starter. You know, I had some people messaging me about his game yesterday saying that it was the first time they'd really gotten a chance to see him. And it was shocking how little awareness he had. It just is something you don't see as an NFL quarterback. And I'm watching that game thinking this is the best that Will Levis has played all season, maybe ever.
I thought that was just, like, he starts that game off with a touchdown to Ridley, and I'm thinking maybe I was thinking they should have stuck with Rudolph, and then well, maybe they were right. But
Rudolph would not have taken all of those sacks where Will Levis appeared not to know that the defense is allowed to rush. But yeah, I mean, you get the occasional interesting play from him. That kind of goes back to Baker Mayfield, who came out of college and had some unfortunate echoes of sort of the Johnny Manziel type of deal, where you had this small quarterback who looked athletic in college, doesn't really look athletic at the NFL level, doesn't look like he has the arm to play at the NFL level, does some decent things, which is different than Manziel, who obviously had a substance problem that kept him from ever being able to show whether or not he could make this evolution himself. I think a lot of people don't believe he could play. That's very possible. It is one of those elements where addiction is devastating, and you want to help everybody that you know in your life that has any issues, because you come out of college, you make that next step. If those things are in place, it's not just being an NFL player. Obviously, it's all different types of environments and professions where it can destroy your life. You look back to Baker Mayfield, he comes out not particularly good, has the situation with Odell Beckham, gets injured, plays through the injury, looks bad playing through the injury. He's frustrated that the Cleveland Browns are kind of throwing him under the bus and not like standing up for how tough he was to play with the injury. He goes to the Carolina Panthers. You obviously don't want to play there. He has the miracle comeback for the Rams. You end up last season with the Bucs, and you facilitate good seasons from Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. Then you come out in 2024 and Colm, Baker Mayfield is moving into this category of not just like interesting and fun and like weird. Why did he do that? And now some fantasy points, and you can keep your team in the game. If a few of these games had broken slightly differently for the Buccaneers, they should have defeated the Chiefs last week. They should have defeated the 49ers in this game. I mean, you'd be talking about him as like this dark horse in the MVP conversation. And in his case, it would be more justified because he is the guy who is doing this, right? The players leading in targets for this game are Rachaad White and Cade Otton. You mentioned the play with Bosa. I have that down as the best play of the year. Now, one of the things the commentators mentioned, and I do think is very real, is that in that particular play,
Tom Brady said he had never seen a play like it. I didn't think that was taking it a bit too far. You've gone with the play of the year. This is a man who's won, 7 Super Bowls? He's never seen anything like it.
Well, yeah, because you're talking about a tiny little...
This is a man who lost in the Super Bowl to multiple spectacular New York Giants catches, or he's part of the Patriots team that had that Edelman reception against the Atlanta Falcons where they come back from 20-3. But this one play was it was the pinnacle.
I mean, not having ever seen anything like it doesn't mean it was the best play that he's seen. He's just I haven't seen a tiny little scrubby quarterback hold off one of the great defensive players of our era with a stiff arm for 5 yards. It's I haven't seen that particular thing. Now, I think from Bosa's side of it, it's the situation that so many defenders are dealing with. Now, again, I want to say that I think that in the vast majority of cases, the hits that are penalized are hits that should be penalized. But there are enough random penalties that as a defender, you don't know, right? I mean, one of the things I was going to mention last week is that Brian Branch, who's having a fantastic season for Detroit, his hit was so dirty when he got ejected that not only should you be ejected, but you should be suspended, right? That kind of thing has no place in football. And I love that guy, but that's one of the dirtiest hits you will ever see. The defender in this situation, Bosa, is kind of now that we're locked up like this, I really don't know exactly what I'm allowed to do. Or just anything that I do, there's a real risk, and probably this play isn't going to result in anything.
You could have seen this last season being a hip drop tackle, I think. Where the defender pulls his arm and goes, drops his body weight. Which we don't want to see, obviously. Yeah,
no, we don't want to see those things. It was an incredible play by Mayfield. I mean, Mayfield, we talk about Brett Favre, but Brett Favre was one of these guys who, and again, you're going to have a little bit different perspective as a long time, huge Green Bay Packers fan. But Brett Favre is one of these guys who thinks that he is larger than football, who has an absolute cannon, who is mostly playing on elite teams. And so when we talk about him as a gunslinger, we're talking about it from a perspective of insane talent, combined with narcissism, combined with winning. And so you're kind of he does those things, but should you get as much credit for that as it coming from someone like Baker Mayfield? Now, Baker Mayfield, also an odd character who certainly feels good about himself. But, you're talking about a real underdog who is playing the kind of football at a quarterback position that you just never see, right? It's absolutely wild, the things that he does every Sunday. He had a play in this game where, for no particular reason, he was under some pressure. He moves out of the pocket. He does a reverse spin, and then he fires a pass all in one motion into the end zone. Now, the unfortunate thing is the pass is underthrown. It should have been a touchdown. But Baker Mayfield, and again, we're ranting and raving about a game where in the end he threw for 116 yards, right? But in that context, he kept the Buccaneers moving and put them in position to win this game. The other part with it, Bucky Irving. Every week. So the thing with Bucky Irving is that if he were it's a little bit like the thing with Baker Mayfield, where you're if he were actual NFL size and athleticism the athleticism thing is a little bit weird because it's a very specific type of thing. Like if he were a normal sized NFL human being, then he would be Barry Sanders. Now Barry Sanders was short, right? But thick and fast and all of those types of things. Not super fast in a straight line. Anyway, people are gonna be like, you've really dug yourself a hole with this comparison. Bucky Irving's ability to make guys miss is something I have not seen from any player since Barry Sanders. And that includes Shawn McCoy. I mean, the person who would be kind of
like when the defender goes to tackle him, I think he can disappear for a second. And I think that's what happens.
It's kind of weird because you would sort of expect someone that can make the moves that he can make to have like broken the 3-cone record by like this incredible percentage that it would never ever be challenged again. I think the problem for Bucky is that when he's not like actually in the instant of the move, he has no athleticism at all. Right? He has no speed in a straight line. Even like once he's moved sideways, like he's not really fast again there as soon as the move is gone. But the ability to make guys miss. He's 13 carries, 73 yards, a touchdown, catches 3 passes in this one. And I mean, there's another kind of weird game where Rachaad White gets into the end zone. He does a couple of decent things. It's so exciting that they have kind of moved to Irving. You look at the last 2 weeks combined, and they've moved to Irving as the ball carrier. If they can then move to him as a receiver. Now, one of the things, again, Rachaad White made some fantastic plays as a receiver in this game. We see a lot of situations where guys who can't really play receiver, like Tyrone Tracy, move to running back. Usually that's nothing. Even someone like Antonio Gibson, it turned out to be a little bit of a red herring. That's not really the way to describe his rookie season. He was fantastic. He's still decent. Maybe that will happen with Tyrone Tracy as well. Tracy, one of the things that was just very disheartening about this week is that Chase Brown and Tyrone Tracy, 2 of our very favorite players, had sensational games and then both basically lost the game for their teams with ill-timed fumbles. The one with Tyrone Tracy, very directly.
Yeah.
You can't make that fumble there in overtime. I kind of think that Rachaad White should be transitioned to receiver. He cannot play running back. He is a fantastic receiver. I mean, is that actually viable? No. I mean, the NFL actual receivers are required to run a lot of routes that running backs never run. But man, Rachaad White looks good as a receiver. He can't run the ball. Let's get even a little better than a 13-10 split between these two guys in terms of carries.
Yeah, and the change usually goes the opposite direction, wide receiver to running back, as you mentioned with Tracy, but it is purely the receiving game where White has been effective. But those two guys combined again for 36.7 fantasy points in PPR leagues this week. If we can just keep edging into it with Bucky Irving, but you've mentioned in the past as well, if he gets all the work, he's probably going to disintegrate because he is smaller than the average running back. Shawn, we're going to finish up with the Vikings and the Jaguars. I'm not going to go through the box score and all the information. There is a touchdown rushing in this for Mac Jones, which I touched on earlier. Players being down at the 1. This was one that was given to Etienne, then it was overturned, and Mac Jones was able to rush it in after that. He has 111 passing yards on 22 attempts, 14 completions. With that, there's a limit to what is done in the rest of the passing game. Leading the way by quite some distance is the 8 targets, 6 receptions, 40 yards for Evan Ingram. Brian Thomas Jr. very quiet in this one. We have no Christian Kirk involved. Offense just did not function for the Jacksonville Jaguars. The offense didn't really function for the Minnesota Vikings either, as Sam Darnold, and we'll talk on the Wednesday edition of the podcast about Jared Goff. He did outdo Sam Darnold in the interception stakes this week. Just the 3 interceptions in this one for Sam Darnold, no passing touchdowns. And as I mentioned, did slot him in ahead of Kyler Murray, which is one of my worst decisions so far this entire season. But he's 24 of 38, 241, the 3 interceptions, all 3 interceptions going the way of Justin Jefferson. One of them that should have been overturned on replay, but for some unknown reason wasn't overturned. We get 43 rush attempts here for the Minnesota Vikings, 169 rushing yards, 88 of those going to Aaron Jones. Jones left for a bit of this game, but did come back in at the end. He had just the 3 targets, 2 receptions for 13. We get really nothing from Jordan Addison, 2 for 25. Justin Jefferson, 5 for 48. TJ Hawkinson was very positive, Shawn, to see 9 targets for him, 8 receptions for 72, looking, like he's getting back into it again after his absence to start the season. This game, Shawn, 12-7. This was up there with some of the worst quarterback play of the week. Hit me with some, really positive notes here to finish this one off.
Well, it's good for the Vikings that they have a lot of great players, that they have a good defense. 82 plays for the Minnesota Vikings,
for
43 plays for the Jacksonville Jaguars. It's sort of humorous when you look and see the Jaguars were almost 50% on third down. That becomes less relevant when you're simply turning the ball over on all of your drives. The Jaguars led for a huge chunk of this game. It's a 16-play, 68-yard, 7-minute and 46-second field goal drive that finally allows the Vikings to take the lead with 7 minutes to go in the fourth quarter. Right? You have a game in which the other team ran 42 plays, where the quarterback threw for 111 yards, where their last 3 drives finish out fumble, interception, and you sneak it out 12-7, getting that first lead late. Well, they led 3-0, but getting that lead back midway through the fourth quarter. Colm, I don't know. I mean, Nick Mullins, right? Nick Mullins has to be the answer. At some point, you've got to throw in the towel on this Sam Darnold. Because one of the things here, and I think a lot of people are going to say, TJ Hawkinson tied for the lead in targets. So it's not that every pass is going to Justin Jefferson, but so many of these interceptions are just a situation where as soon as Darnold gets a little bit flustered, he figures out where Justin Jefferson is and throws the ball at him, even if there are 3 or 4 guys in front of him. So this game here, too, it's not just the interceptions. Anybody who was following along with it know that the first 2 happened in the end zone. One of those, as you mentioned, should have been overturned. The third happens at the 1. When you go back and look through the numbers, Colm, you'll have to do a little bit of detective work for us over the next 24 hours until we record again. See if there are some great stats out there about how likely it is to win with 5 interceptions and how likely it is to win with 3 interceptions, all of which take place at the 1-yard line or in. One of the stats that they did put up for that Lions game was that no team had trailed by 15 plus points and thrown 5 interceptions and won since 1970. So not a great job of the Houston Texans finishing that one off. Yeah, the Vikings, kind of a fun team. You have Jordan Addison with the 5 targets, one of those wide open, middle of the field. Sam Darnold throws it 5 yards over his head. That ball lands aimlessly, is not picked off. I don't know. I mean, obviously you can't play Addison. You can't play Sam Darnold.
No,
I don't know what to do with this Vikings team. I mean, TJ Hawkinson and Justin Jefferson are going to be fantasy machines. I do think that we're back to a point, and many people are going to say that this is flagrantly obvious, which it is, but just one of the discussions throughout this season was how much, or certainly a discussion in the preseason, and then a lot of people declared victory for Justin Jefferson. I don't have a big stake in it, in that I thought Jefferson was a fine pick. I thought Jamar Chase was a fine pick. Both of those guys for risky for different reasons. Certainly, really liked CeeDee Lamb and Tyreek Hill for injury reasons and injuries to quarterbacks and what have you. Those picks have also not worked out that well. Garrett Wilson was making a push prior to this most recent game. I mean, it's now Jamar Chase pretty easily, right? So the question, would you prefer Jamar Chase with Joe Burrow or Justin Jefferson with Sam Darnold? That is not an easy, that's not a difficult one to work through there. It's hard to watch weapons like Jefferson and Addison play in this Sam Darnold offense. The other thing, Colm, that we're looking at is simply that the Jacksonville Jaguars are atrocious defensively. So this is another matchup where a team
that was one of the reasons to defend myself.
Yeah, I mean,
let me defend myself here. we have seen this season, but prior to week 10, Jacksonville Jaguars had faced 6 quarterbacks who had 30 plus attempts this season. None of them scored less than 15. That was Deshaun Watson. So we'll say that all of them scored more than 15. And then the average was 22.6 points. So, matchup wise, I was thinking this was going to be positive. I was just picturing Justin Jefferson just running free the entire game, like Jamar Chase. And did not happen, Shawn.
Yeah, well, I certainly wouldn't have played him over Kyler Murray, but I did play him on a main event team. And I mean, it's tough. I've been going back and forth on how cuttable he is in situations where you don't have one of the top 2 or 3 guys and you're trying to stream, because then you get to this situation and this is the game where you play him for the exact reasons that you mentioned. The only concern that you have in this game is that the Jaguars, especially with Mac Jones, are just not going to be able to score any. And so you're up 3 touchdowns, midway through the second quarter, and maybe they play it pretty passively from that point on. Colm, they were the fight of their lives to win this game. So, yeah, it's pretty bleak out there. I guess one of the tiny silver linings, he ran for 28 yards. There's some mobility there from Sam Darnold. That's 3 points that, depending on your format, the scrambles actually neutralize the interceptions. And so then you're just looking at how much does 241 scoreless yards get you?
Yeah, it's one of the smallest silver linings, Shawn, I've ever seen. But we will finish up there for this one. We wanted to keep some of the fun games because there wasn't many this week for the episode that will come out on Wednesday. So we will come back for that. Lots more to talk through and what it means for the rest of the fantasy football season. My name is Colm Kelly. You can follow me on Twitter at @OverToMarlin. My co-host is Shawn Siegele. Check out all his work up on RotoViz.com. The Zero RB report will be, as always, fascinating, but even more so this week, a lot of split backfields to work the way through. But until we are back, have a good one.